So, good evening, everyone. I hope you have had a great day and you've had a great evening. And we have a special guest joining today with us, Dr. Aparna Agrawal, who has been researching on waste for a long time now. I think Aparna is more qualified to talk about it than me. So, as part of our podcast series, we thought that it would be really interesting to bring in outside expertise to explore the world of waste and the Wastescape. And Aparna, of course, is an expert when it comes to Wastescape in Delhi. So, Aparna, it's good morning in Switzerland. Good morning, Aparna. And it would be really nice if you can introduce yourself to us and our viewers.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much, Malith, for having me over.
Of
And
course.
I, in any case, do not have any better expertise than you. We've all seen you've been in the thick of your fieldwork. So for me, the journey of waste started with my PhD. I did my PhD from the Department of International Development, University of Oxford. Before that, before my PhD, I was mostly focusing on processes of urbanization in my MPhil, and I did my master's in MPhil in political studies from Center for Political Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. At present, I have an assistant professor position in India at OP Jindal Global University, but I'm on leave right now, which ends very shortly. And at present, I'm based at University of Lausanne as Swiss Government Excellence Fellow, where I'm trying to work on my manuscript to publish my research. Yeah.
Right. So then, thank you so much, Aparna, again for joining with us. I know that you are quite busy, and of course, other than doing research on waste, you guys should know that Aparna makes a mean cook as well. I had the pleasure of having a dinner with her. She very graciously hosted me. I'm still talking about your the paneer curry that you cooked for me. I'm very grateful for that. And that's on a different note other than the podcast, but I really appreciate of it. Let's start off the discussion by maybe gently touching on what was the focus of your PhD before move on to the question number one. Could you please introduce us to your PhD and what were your key focuses?
Yeah, okay. So thank you for that question, Malith. So the key focus of my PhD was to look at, I started with focusing on the aspect of informal waste pickers around the landfills in Delhi. My field site particularly was the Bhalsawa landfill, which is located on the northwestern part of the city, or northwestern periphery actually. And I wanted to look at what did their everyday life, what did their everyday life look like? What were their processes of waste picking? How they were selling it in the market? What were their relations with the scrap dealers? So, and looking at their background, these were some of the questions I started with. But I think my PhD changed drastically as I started my fieldwork. I realized that, when we think of waste work in India, we think of only specific um, Dalit communities who are
Mhm.
involved in this work. But when I went to my field site, I realized that there's so many various not Dalit communities, but various lower caste communities who were engaged in waste work. So I realized that they have very different relations with the materials and how they looked at waste work. So basically my research started changing from over there, and I mean, I did obviously focus on the informal aspect of their work relations, but over a period of time, my thesis really it became about, the social relations among waste pickers. What are their relations with the waste materials, and with the larger Delhi's waste economy. So very, if I have to put it in like in a line, I would say that my thesis became so much about waste materials, social relations, and urban spaces, and everything that is happening within that. And of course, in the context of changing urban political economy of the city as such, because I think the changing materiality of these waste materials significantly shaped the communities of waste pickers who today come to Delhi and make a living of it. So that's what broadly my thesis has been about.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. I think that's really, really interesting because it's always important to set the background before we delve into the deeper discussion. So I was privileged to actually go through your PhD very briefly before getting ready for our discussion. And I realized that your field is a very interesting field. And if I say, if please tell me if I'm pronouncing it right. Is it Balswa landfill? What is that's your key area of interest in terms of the field? So one of the key themes that emerges out of your thesis, and one of the key things that you try to bring out, is that the Balswa landfill itself is more than a dumping ground, and you point out that it functions as a space for both livelihood and disposability for waste workers. Shall we start the discussion, that like delving deep into the discussion from that?
Yes, yes, absolutely, Malith. So, yes, it is a site of disposability in terms of waste materials and livelihood for the waste workers. So now I think if we widen our lens a bit, we'll realize that it's not that there is a community of waste workers. I mean, there is, but the idea is also to understand that lots of people who are staying there, a lot of them have been rehabilitated because of government schemes, and a lot of them happen to be there because of low rents in
Mm.
that specific area, because of course it's next to the landfill site.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, for them, it's a more cheaper area to stay in, cheaper residential site to stay around. So a lot of people who never engaged in waste work before this, I mean, they were doing all sorts of ancillary works in informal economy, but they came in this particular space, and some of them took on to waste picking. So in that sense, we need to, when we think about livelihood of waste workers, we need to understand that not, I mean, in the informal economy, there is no hardcore understanding of who's a professional waste worker or who's
Hmm.
not. Some
Yeah.
communities are, but some communities actually, they may be doing other kinds of work as well. So they're continuously delving into different kinds of work. So that is a very brief aspect of their livelihood. It's also the relations around the landfill are so complex that we cannot really dissect the aspects of their livelihood and that of disposability. So, livelihood in terms of if they're living their everyday lives over there, and in terms of their work, the waste picking. That is one aspect. I think we also need to slightly think about disposability. So, their lives are not about disposability, it's the
Hmm.
materials that are getting disposed in that particular space, which they are making a living out of, right? So, that is the disposability element. Of course, there are scholars who use the term disposable lives. Now, what does that term? I mean, sorry, this is a small digression, but the reason I am explaining this term is also to understand that very often even I do that in my thesis and my articles, that we use the term disposable lives, and we often conflate it with disposability. So the meaning
Hmm.
of disposable lives is that when a lot of communities are rehabilitated in these spaces, they become disposable for the state, right? That in the fact, in the meaning that anyone can be put over there, as if these lives do not hold any meaning. It's so
Hmm.
disposable, right? Like, we can dispose waste materials anywhere, we can dispose these people also, right? So that's the idea when one uses the term disposable lives. But the communities, that actually then their life world shows us that they're not really disposable, because what they are doing is they're making value out of these waste materials, right? So when they are doing that, and in a way that they are reproducing city spaces. If one were to live under the burden of these waste materials around these landfill sites, a city would not, any city in the world would not be functional if not for the labor of informal waste pickers. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, in other countries, we have incinerator plants, which is there in Delhi as well now, which we call as waste to energy plant.
Mm-hmm.
So that being said, now again, let's go back to their livelihood and life world. Right. So my research broadly has been about looking at different communities who stay around these landfills and how do they make sense of their life world. Right. So the thing is, one is to look at the labor processes of looking at waste picking. Some people do it out of absolute precarity, right? And some people do it in terms of it provides them a sort of flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
So say for example, there are people who have no education, and because of their marginality, like the social marginality that they're part of historically, they do not even have access to, other kinds of informal wage work like factory work.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, accessing the landfill becomes one of the easiest way to earn money. So there are people who do waste work because of that, but there are lots of women who are engaged in waste work also, men and women actually both, but women more so because it offers them a certain kind of flexibility. And this is not a narrative just coming from my field work, but lots of scholars such as Kathleen Miller in the context of Brazil, they also talk about these things, that how, a lot of women, they want to do this work because within the context of precarity, of course, they want to do this work because then they can come back and take care of their kids, then they
Mm-hmm.
can send their husbands to work,
Yeah.
right? So of course it is coming out of this understanding of dual burden of patriarchy that women have to face, right? So they have to do this work, they have to take care of their household chores, but if they can access the landfill, and they very often tend to do so early in the morning, so then they know that they can earn some money also, and then they can take care of their household.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, their livelihood vis-a-vis waste work is playing out. Having said that, there are a lot of young people, especially young people, who often they will, they see it as another gig. What they do is that sometimes they will do office work or some kind of informal work. So, say for example, I met this one guy, he often works in Mumbai. He works as a painter. So he goes around, like he has contract with some small company, and he goes around painting houses. So when he's tired of that job, he comes back to Delhi. That's where his parents live, around the landfill, and then he does waste picking. So when he wants to just take a break from his work, he will come back. But he also knows that when he's coming back, he's not necessarily completely out of work, so he will go to the landfill to pick up some materials,
Mm-hmm.
sell them to the scrap dealers, and then make some money out of it. So they're also continuously juggling between different jobs, but it also gives them a flexibility that once his, as a painter, his work is done, he can come back to his hometown and do this work. So, but for him, painting is his primary work. So when he's going to Mumbai, he says that, it gives me a sense of freedom which I do not feel over here. So that is one aspect. But I think the even more interesting aspect is to look at how these different communities are making meaning of out of waste work. So say for example, in my work, I'll say that I'll divide them into three communities, broadly speaking. So I look at nomadic communities. Then I look at so nomadic communities are communities who've been historically marginalized. They were seen as criminal tribes
Mm-hmm.
by the British government. And in post-colonial India, even though they were decriminalized, they continue to face the brunt of the state, in terms of they are seen with a sense of suspicion. So the two communities that I look at are Masit and Kalandar. They are the ones around the field side. Then we have Bengali Muslims, who are mostly coming from West Bengal, and they've been in Delhi since 1980s, and because of unemployment back in their home state, they came to Delhi. And when we think about these Bengali Muslims, they're also again from lower caste communities among Muslim communities in Bengal. And then, although at a broader level, they're classified as the other backward classes, the OBC
Mm-hmm.
communities in India. But I would say that, the condition is really bad. So, because there can be dominant OBCs communities in India as well. So, but that is not the case with Bengali Muslims, the ones who come to Delhi. And then the last ones, I look at the Hindu OBCs. Right, so there's a colony where we have a lot of informal waste pickers who are coming from Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, and they're coming maybe because of not just economic precarity but the ecological conditions back home. So the ecological conditions back home are not quite sustainable. They pose them a lot of danger, and hence they had to migrate to the city because of the flooding, because the farming was not quite sustainable after a
Hmm.
period of time. So there are these different communities who have come to the city around the landfill site and are engaging in waste work. Now, their social and historical background of all these communities are so different that the meaning that they make from this work is also going to be very different, right?
Hmm.
Because, for example, even in our informal conversations, I've told you that how within the context of India, the way stigma operates with waste work, because historically only scheduled caste communities were doing this work, and now other communities are also doing this work. So there
Hmm.
is broadly a stigma associated with the work. So now, different when these three different communities are engaging in this work, they're also within their intra and interpersonal relations, especially around the landfill, they're also seen in very different ways among themselves, that when they're doing this work. And that's what makes this work so very interesting, because the idea of stigma among these communities, how they make sense of their livelihood, is also very distinct. So broadly speaking, the labor processes may remain the same, but how they interpret their work becomes very different, and that's especially because of their social and historical background. And if you want, I can elaborate on this within this answer, or I could, maybe you have follow-up questions and I can
Hmm.
take it from there. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually do have a question about that because I think next I wanted to, because through and through your thesis that you argue that past isn't just reproduced in waste work, but it is also sort of reconfigured, as you just very briefly pointed out. So, how are new caste relations being forged as different communities enter the waste economy? Because you just mentioned number of backward classes, the Bengali Muslims and the scheduled caste members from the Hindu community, and also the is it the tribal communities, nomadic community. So, how does that work?
Okay. So yeah, there is a lot to unpack there. Give me
Hmm.
some time.
Hmm.
Because your also question starts from cars getting reconfigured,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So before we try to look at cars getting reconfigured within the around the landfill site, let's try and think about caste in relation to waste work. Let's try to contextualize it more. So, for example, like I said that in India, actually even in South Asia, waste work historically has been done by scheduled caste communities. If you want to give the community a more political term, we'll call them as Dalits. Anyways, so in Delhi, this work was done by mostly, if I may say so, by Chudas and the Bhangi communities. And of course, over a period of time, these communities they became part of the larger umbrella of Hinduism, and then they were termed as Balmikis. So, for example, when you are talking about cleaners in the city, we are mostly using the term Balmikis. A lot of community members, those who are very political, they may not identify themselves as Balmikis, and those, but many also do. So, I mean, I think just for just for the sake of ease, I'm going to use the term Balmiki. So Balmikis have been the ones who've historically been the sanitation workers and cleaners of the city. So, and this also then runs slightly into the question of what they were cleaning. They were mostly
Hmm.
cleaning dust, human excreta, vegetable peels, because earlier we had that kind of waste, right? And now there is a change in materiality of waste materials, and that is why we see the coming of these different communities that we've been talking about. Now, having said that, when we talk about Balmikis, they were historically forced to do this work, right? It's not that when these communities are coming to Delhi and they're doing this work, they're doing it out of economic precarity.
Mhm.
But Balmikis, it's not that they took up this work. I'm sure economic precarity has been a big part of Balmiki community as well. But historically, the way caste system has functioned in our country, it becomes more like that it was their task. So, for
Mhm.
example, if you know about caste system in India, we know the basically the most of the ex-untouchable communities have been doing so-called quote unquote defiled works, right? So
Mhm.
there's a particular community who will do leather work. Then there's a particular community who will do washing work. Then there are particular communities who do cleaning work.
Mhm.
So we have Balmikis. Now, over a period of time, our research shows Dana Kornberg, myself, and then there's this another scholar, Olivia Kaleja. We've noticed that, there's a shift in the sense that a lot of Balmikis are trying to distance themselves in a certain context from waste work. So,
Mhm.
of course, if waste in terms of sanitation work, if they have that job, a government job, because sanitation workers historically had government job provided by the government of India, and it varies at the state level. So if they had that job, of course they will do that job because it gives them a certain kind of stability. But they also operate at an informal level based on patronage relationships because they've been doing this work for centuries now. So they have established hold among middle class colonies because they were
Mhm.
there also private cleaners at some point. Now, because they were private cleaners, they had hold, and the municipal sanitation system worked in a way that people would take out waste out of their houses, and then there was no connection between a local receptacle and houses. So that gap was informally basically filled by these sweepers or sanitation workers in the city, and that's why people have historically relied on them. Sometimes in a derogatory way, they're also called jamadars. Sorry, all of this sounds too complex, but so historically they have been in this field doing this work either as part of government job or as private cleaners who then attained the position of jamadar, and then they started hiring Bengali Muslims.
Mhm.
So by when they started hiring Bengali Muslims, so they also started taking a step back from this work, and when they took a step back from this work, it came in a way that they somewhat bossed around Bengali Muslims. So now they're hiring other community of workers to do this work and in a way
Mhm.
taking a step back from this work. So
Mhm.
you see, that is where that's the point when the caste relations are getting reconfigured.
Mhm.
Because at a broader level, because in India we still do not have any reservations for Muslim communities, right? So, in terms of scheduled caste reservations, of course, they have. I mean, those who are classified OBC, they do have reservations. But the Bengali Muslims now, then they're broadly classified as OBCs, and now they're working under the scheduled caste community that the Balmikis. So Balmikis become their employers, and Bengali Muslims become the employees. And
Mhm.
then it is the Bengali Muslims in middle class residential neighborhood. They are the ones who are doing door to door collection, whereas Balmikis are the ones who are collecting money on behalf of Bengali Muslims.
Okay.
Now the question that arises is, how are Bengali Muslims earning money then? They're earning money by selling those collected materials to the scrap dealers around. So
Okay.
I think this is a fundamental place where we have to look at how caste relations are getting reconfigured. So now there is a sort of, at a very micro level, there is a reversal of hierarchy, right? But it also again plays out in a very interesting way because a lot of times when you speak to a lot of Bengali Muslim waste workers, they will make casteist comments about about Balmikis as well, because Balmikis historically have been seen as these untouchable communities. So they would make a comment that, oh, now he's going to tell me how to do my job, right? So even though caste relations are getting reconfigured, and at a micro level there is a reversal of caste hierarchy, but also they are aware what is their position, what is Bengali Muslims position in the society, and then what is the position of Balmikis in the society. So I think there is it's a very, when we think about social relations, caste and waste work, it's a very complex it's a very complex space where all these things are happening. And to make it further complex, I'm not going to delve into it much, but now if you look at the positionality of Muslims, and especially lower caste and lower class Muslims, and the
Mhm.
way environment is in the country as it stands today, Muslims are also becoming equally precarious, right? So, I mean, there can be communal relations between the Balmiki community and Bengali Muslims, that becomes another space to explore.
Mhm.
But if you want now, from here on, I can move on to looking at caste relations among waste pickers around the landfill site. But this is something I wanted to explain before we move on there. So, should I move on to that aspect?
But of course, but I think it would be really interesting, Aparna, to maybe share one of my experiences, because it's quite interesting that in Sri Lanka we had the opportunity to actually take some EU students to one of the remote villages in Sri Lanka, which is in the northern part of the country. And when we went to the field, we were supported by a particular non-governmental organization, and we successfully did the activity for about 3, 4 days. And only about after 3, 4 days that we realized that only a certain part, as in certain members of the community, would take part in the research. And when we did a little bit more digging, we got to know that the non-governmental organization that we were getting support from has actually supported one of the scheduled caste in Sri Lanka, who has a practice as tradition have been making responsible for making pots. So over time, they have economically empowered these individuals for a very long time, that these people have economically risen over the previous sort of ruling the caste, which is called the Govigama caste. So now the oppressors have become oppressed and the oppressed have become the oppressors. So I thought it's really interesting to share this story before we move on, because we often think that, these kind of like instances such as caste is quite limited and can be only positioned or discussed in a particular context. But I think when it comes to South Asia, by and large, most of these findings of yours can be applied in different settings. So I just wanted to point that out. Now I think we can move on to the next part of discussing how the interrelations take place within castes.